So the question that the newly branded FTTX Council wanted me to try and answer is, is it all that it's made out to be? And while the Internet of Things is relatively new in terms of the word and the terminology that it's trying to service, it's not that new. So I thought, let me answer the question first, because it's just easier to do that, and then I can talk about whatever else I wanted to talk about in this slideshow. So the answer is yes, it is all it's made out to be. And during the presentation, hopefully we'll be able to answer some of the contextual reasons of why we think it is all that it's made out to be. And I would like to start with defining IoT. And the reason I start with the definition usually is because lots of people have lots of definitions about what IoT means to them, what IoT means to their business, what IoT would mean to any digital transformation journey. So the Internet of Things specifically refers to connecting objects. And those objects could range from very simple temperature sensors to more advanced pressure sensors to things that are able to detect specific pollutants in the air, or even determining what driver behavior is based on how he's actually acting in a motor vehicle. So that thing that we talk about, connecting that thing, it's not necessarily connecting it to the internet, but it is connecting it to a network. And that network could be a private network, it could be the internet, it could be any mechanism that allows you to collect this small piece of data, transport it across the network into some space that then picks it up and processes it. So to add to the definition of the Internet of Things, one could simply say it's about how do I connect in the simplest possible form whatever that object is in a way that allows me to collect data from that specific object. And IoT is really just a mechanism that allows you to collect data. Very little autonomous activity can actually take place at the edge, and that will improve and change over the next couple of years, but primarily it is a data collection mechanism. And that mechanism today is so small that a very small communications chip, like the one that you see up on this slide, is able to actually get hold of that data from that sensor and communicate it through to a network. This specific chip is a low-powered wide area network one, so hence you see the size is really small. It is a very, very small footprint in terms of power and its usage that allows for this data to be collected and then transported over the network. And by being this small, it means that it's contributing to what we would like to call the simplicity of the Internet of Things. And when you think about simplicity, it's actually a cornerstone of what any digital transformation journey needs to be for any business that's undertaking that journey. And by the way, just on digital transformation, most businesses either are going through this journey knowingly, some of them are going through this journey unknowingly, and others are just watching what's happening with digital transformation and how it's going to impact their businesses. But at the bottom end of the digital transformation spectrum of changes that could happen, these simple mechanisms that allow for either a payment process to be automated or a data collection mechanism to be implemented or a completely new business model to be introduced into a company to aid them to be more competitive in digital transformation, the simplicity of it is really, really critical to how they're actually able to service the customer experience. Now, when you think about simplicity, lots of people refer to a specific global company based in California that makes things really, really simple to do. So here you've got a a TiVo remote. So for those that still remember what TiVo was, it was a mechanism where you get a set-top box and you're able to operate this thing. You can watch stuff on demand, you can record stuff, you could play it later, versus the Apple TV, which at the core of it is a really simple mechanism. Now, while companies like Apple and others have tried to simplify the customer experience, many of you are operating in businesses that are pretty difficult to just simply simplify from a digital transformation perspective. And but without the simplification, it makes adoption of the service, it makes the change that you need to undergo really, really difficult, and you'll end up with a few hundred thousand maybe adopted users of your system when the market size is tens, if not hundreds of millions. So that simplicity and how it relates to your customer experience go very much hand in hand. That allows you to undertake any digital transformation journey in a way that contributes positively towards what you're trying to achieve from this journey. And you could be trying to achieve one of two things, really speaking. So the one is, how do I get some efficiency from my business? And that efficiency could be a cost saving, it could be a time saving, which of course relates to costs, or it could fall into a different category that says, how do I do some form of revenue enhancement using a digital transformation process or journey, or more specifically, using the Internet of Things that allows me to gather more contextual data, to know what's happening in my environment, use that data into a repository of somewhere that I can process this information. I could possibly apply an artificial intelligence engine to it, get specific insights from this engine, and use it to either modify my business process, enhance my business process, or create a new revenue stream for my customer. So this journey that we talk about, and the simplicity of the journey of the Internet of Things, is underpinned by, I would summarize it into 4 pillars. And the first pillar being low cost. Now, some years ago, probably early 2000s, when companies started adopting centralized storage platforms and centralized systems to store data, and looking at the comparison between on-site hosting of their data with big servers versus the cloud, which really started getting traction mid-2000s, lots of people were talking about what are the cost implications of that. And cost always remains front and center in any kind of technological adoption that businesses need to undertake. So when you think about the Internet of Things, you need to keep costs front and center in terms of what is this look like? How much is this going to cost me? And it needs to be low cost. So low cost from 2 perspectives. One is enablement. How do I make something communicate in the cheapest possible way? So what kind of a chip do I need to add to this thing? Or what kind of a mechanism do I need to add to a chair that's out here in this auditorium today to know what the occupancy level is? So it needs to be cheap enough. It needs to be simple enough that I could simply embed it and it should work. So that's the one element of cost, is the enablement cost. And enablement cost for IoT, and specifically with the Sigfox network, which we're rolling out, in 2015, the communications module was about $12 to enable something. So $12 is quite expensive for connecting hundreds of millions of objects, but for connecting a couple 100,000, it's not that bad. And we all hear the numbers of where the Internet of Things are going, so I'm not going to quote those numbers. But $12 was still relatively high. At the beginning of 2017, the cost enablement for a Sigfox-enabled device came down to about $2. So that's a big shift from $12 to $2. Now, at $2, you can enable many, many items. You can enable billions of devices as you start to adopt them in various environments. And last week, we announced together with Sigfox in Prague that we're now at a price point where we can do low-cost enablement even on disposable devices. So that price point is now, with limited communication capability, 20 US cents. And that gets to general availability, not sometime in the future, but January next year. So that changes what I can enable. So I could now put it into a tracking envelope. I can put it into any package that's being shipped around the country or around the world and be able to know when and where this item is and when it's actually opened, because I now have a disposable mechanism that I could embed in that specific object. So cost is a critical component when you think about Internet of Things. One is the enablement part, and the other one is the ongoing costs. And the ongoing costs is really your connectivity costs. And I think earlier in the year, or late last year, this movement of data prices must fall, made lots of headlines around what are those costs of mobile data. We've taken this mechanism of the business model that typically gets used for charging for data, and we've turned it around a little bit. Not a drastic improvement, but what we've done is we've come up with maximum pricing and said this is the maximum you would ever pay for a device per annum, not per month, not per packet, not per day, not per bundle, but a maximum price you pay per annum, and then we have a minimum price that you pay per annum. And that price ranges from, depending on volumes, from about 7 Rand per annum to about 120 Rand per annum. So that, price point of this connected object is already designed to allow you to connect hundreds of millions of objects that can be used in South Africa or can be used in any other part of the world. The second pillar in IoT deployment, there needs to be some form of long-range communication mechanism. In other words, I must not have to deploy Bluetooth low-energy base stations in every room, in every building, in every company in the country. I need to have base stations that are deployed that can cover very, very vast amounts of the land mass of where people live, where people work. And long-range communications mechanisms using a sub-gigahertz radio, like the picture I showed you right at the beginning with the man's finger with the chip on it, that's a sub-gigahertz chip able to communicate at very, very vast distances. So we started rolling out this dedicated IoT network at the beginning of this year, probably February, late February, and today, because of this long-range capability, we're able to cover about 64% of the population. So that's a very short space of time to cover a very vast amount of the population, which will allow us to make this connectivity available throughout the country. So a long-range mechanism inherently built into this technology called Sigfox allows us to do such crazy amounts of coverage that we have today. The third pillar is low power. So if you think about power consumption in a communications device, and we all have these communications devices. I see some people with 2 communications devices as well, on the lap, one for calls, I suppose, and then one for cheap data. I don't know what else you would use them for. But you know how often you have to charge your phones. You know that you can't go, for most smartphones, you can't go beyond 2 or 3 days. In some cases, you can't go beyond half a day. So power consumption on a communications device becomes critical. And for the Internet of Things to really deliver its power and capability of being able to operate in an environment that you don't need to go charge this device. Now imagine if you had a water meter that's supposed to report your usage, and you've got to go charge this water meter or the device that's on there once a week. It's not going to work, right? You need the battery life to last as long as the actual application use. So if I'm putting out a water meter and that water meter is going to last 15 years, the battery must last 15 years. End of story. There should be no debate about how do I match my use case to the battery life versus what this thing needs to do. And today, and I'll touch on a couple of examples later, we have devices that are built specifically for that use case, and they last 15 years. So we have devices that could be a secondary tracker in a motor vehicle, and that will last 3 years, not because the vehicle lasts 3 years, but because you might want to change that device. You might want to change the location of it at some point in time. So low power is a critical underpinning pillar of the Internet of Things, and for allowing for the power usage of that device to match very much to the actual use case, from something that lasts 6 months today to lasting 15 years. And those devices exist already today. So nothing that we are talking about today will be some stuff coming in some distant future. So the device that I spoke about, the disposable one, that must be so small, so cheap that you can embed it in an envelope or a package, that might have the capability to just send out 2 messages, because you only want it to send out 2 messages, and it will last for as long as that journey takes. It could even last for a couple of months while this thing is transit, depending on who your postage company is. It varies from country to country when you want to ship something. Sometimes it could take a week, sometimes it takes a couple of months. So you want to be able to cater for those cases as well. The 4th pillar is reliability and security. So security has become a real concern for businesses as they consider how this new mechanism, this new thing that's now in my network, this new thing that I'm now rolling out hundreds of thousands of in my business, are these things able to communicate on the internet? What information are they able to send? Can somebody hack into this thing? Can they get my data? Can they get my location of my high-value goods? So security is really critical to basically cater for from the ground up. So what we do from a security perspective is it's handled at 4 levels. The first level is that the device that's out there, whether it's a chair that's connected, or whether it's a vehicle that has a tracking device in it, or whether it's a water meter that you don't want your neighbors to know how much of water you're using. Oh, actually, there's a more appropriate example, but we'll have to skip that considering the country we're in, Western Cape. So, but that usage information it could be quite sensitive. It could be really sensitive that I don't want anyone to know it. So that object that you got deployed in the field needs to be secure enough. So firstly, what we do is the security level is inherently built in that nobody can talk to this device, right? So you can't initiate communication to the water meter. It's just not possible to do that. What happens, though, is the meter will initiate communication back to the base station in a very secure way. And while it has its window open, which the base station is aware of, it can communicate back to the device. So the first thing you do is you remove the capability of somebody being able to communicate to the device, either via radio or by plugging something directly into this thing. So you immediately remove a significant level of threat of the device itself being able to do whatever it needs to do. So that's the first level. The second level is that radio communication, that is encapsulated between the device and all the way to the base station. And that's in an ultra-narrowband frequency. It's sub-gigahertz. It cannot be jammed. Cannot be jammed because jamming devices need to be small and portable. To jam this specific network that we're rolling out, you need a very large device to be able to jam something like maybe you want to jam a vehicle from communicating its location, or jam a panic button. It's pretty difficult to do that without a very large radio emitting device. And that device needs to be as large as a black Mini Cooper S, John Cooper Works Edition, about that size, to be able to jam this communication. So that secure mechanism that you're transporting this information on is relatively secure. Of course, if you get a device that big, you'll be able to flood out any radio network. So that's the second component of how to keep this thing secure. The third is the communication from that base station with the payload into a cloud, and that also is a secure connection, and the fourth being that connection from the cloud back into a customer's environment. So security is taken care of from the ground up, all the way from the time the device is deployed, all the way back to when that message is fed back. These four pillars actually allow you to operate in a number of use cases across industry verticals. And those industry verticals could be anywhere from the agricultural sector to the automotive, to health, to public sector, retail and finance, utilities. Utilities, we'll touch on some utilities cases in subsequent slides. But in each of these verticals, when you think about the power of IoT and what it can actually deliver, and if I were to just pick out one specific example, which is in the logistics space. The logistics space lends itself to allowing for many, many devices, not just the vehicle itself, but the actual cargo that it's carrying, the actual goods that it's carrying. And we've been talking to a retailer recently that receives these goods, which are perishable goods, food items that get to their store, and they, at the receiving part of the store, they first check the temperature levels of these food items that was delivered to them. And if it is outside of specific thresholds that they specified for those items, they have to send it back. So that creates a couple of challenges. The first thing it does is that the shelf remains empty, right? They only know they're not going to put this item on the shelf after they've received it at the store itself, so they have to send it back, so there's a cost of sending it back. Those goods have to be destroyed because that's the rules of that specific chain, and they have to now request another delivery. So that's not useful for the customer, it's not useful for the store owner, it's not useful for the retail chain, it's not useful for the producer. So enabling that specific example with IoT, where you're constantly providing temperature information to some central place that is monitoring this, not with a human being, preferably with a machine, that can pick out these issues way in advance of it happening, knowing that when it does get to the store, it's not going to be at the right temperature. You can already dispatch another set of stock. And then using that information, determine how do I actually correct this behavior going forward. And the Internet of Things will also allow us to gather a lot more data that allows us to correct the environment to the extent that I won't need to know that actually I need to get it out the factory at a certain temperature. Eventually, I will know that actually I don't need to enable this specific pallet or this specific vehicle with these temperature sensors because I've done what I needed to do at source in a way that allows me to deliver the product. So we'll actually want to get to a point where we'll make it so efficient and produce so much of data that it will remove the need for us to exist as the Internet of Things company because you corrected your supply chain. And then we'll move on to other things. There's just two examples I want to talk about where you could get a real practical sense of how IoT really delivers value. The one is in water metering. So all those logos you see on that slide are makers of devices, sometimes makers of actual water meters, and makers of items that basically go towards contributing in the water metering space. So none of this is again lab stuff. This is real things. This is not NB-IoT. Here we're talking about real connectivity with live deployments. All of these companies are making simple items like a data logging device, which fits onto an existing meter because you most likely not going to go change your water meter. But most water meters in South Africa have been deployed, have some pulse sensing port. And when you say most, we're talking about greater than 80% of meters already deployed that have been deployed over the many years already have this capability. So some of these guys like Lucira Tech are producing devices that you could literally just plug into an existing meter and you'll be able to report usage. But more than just usage, you're able to look at what consumption is across a wide spectrum of a suburb, of an estate, of a city, and of a country. With more advanced devices, you have the capability of plumbing a water management unit in line with your water meter that not only is able to provide more richer contextual data like flow rates and pressure and usage, but it also is able to provide you with information that tells you, Mr. Customer, you have a leak. And they're able to do that by learning from the usage patterns. Of course, they're learning with the leaks, but they're also learning the different pressure changes that take place to this meter and can, with a high level of accuracy, determine whether that home has a water leak. This water management device as well has the capability to shut down your water to a trickle, so not completely zero it out. And that's useful for many, many cities actually around the world, not just Cape Town that has this massive water issue at the moment, but you're able to allocate a quota for a specific household. And you can say, once you've exceeded that quota, this meter will now go down into a trickle mode. So you can still drink a glass of water, you could still fill up toilets, but you may not be able to take a long shower. You may not be able to take a long bath until the next day when that valve opens up again. So these are mechanisms that only with a really long battery life, with a low power consumption profile, with a low cost profile, and with a long range communications mechanism does it make these possible. So Lucira happens to be a South African company that's building that device, which is highly, highly innovative. And it's really up there with some of the other European brands that you see there that are making similar devices. So we also have the ability in South Africa to engineer and design products that can compete with many, many large global companies that have been doing it for decades. And that's one of the other components of what we're doing as Sqwidnet, is we're enabling an ecosystem of device makers, enabling any company, any entrepreneur, any hobbyist to start building product that can service the IoT ecosystem. And if you want more information on that, you could just go to our website on sqwidnet.com and log your interest, tell us what you want to do, and we'll send you stuff to get you started on building. But these companies, and unlike the picture on the next one, all of these guys are also building product that allow for simple asset tracking. So asset tracking, asset is let's use it as a relatively loose term. An asset could be a high-value goods, it could be a child, it could be a wife, it could be a girlfriend, it could be both, it could be any one of these human systems, non-human systems, objects, goods, anything that you actually want to track. So it's not necessarily vehicle tracking. This is about being able to track where is the blood pressure machine in this hospital? Is it in the right floor? Is it being used? And understanding that, okay, has it left the building? Because blood pressure machines are not supposed to leave the hospital, but they do sometimes. So the idea is to be able to track everything and anything that is supposed to be at a certain point, or track something to the extent that tells you when it has entered an area that it shouldn't enter. So you could do very simple things like geofencing on a wide range of items. And some of the tracking companies in South Africa actually have been doing this really, really well for many years, using their vehicle tracking devices, so the Netstars and the trackers, where they've defined red zones, as one of the tracking companies called them. And if you drive into that red zone, somebody phones you and say, hey, we just see you've entered Parkhurst. Are you okay? Right? Okay, I'm just using Parkhurst as an example. It's not actually Parkhurst. Or Las Vegas, no. So if you're entering Parkhurst, they have flagged it as with a specific profile, and a call center agent will call you. But it's not highly efficient, right? And it's not evolved to the extent that the driver will need to answer this call. Maybe you're in the boot of the vehicle, sadly. You can't answer the call to say, yeah, actually I am in Parkhurst, but I'm in the boot of the car, so I can't react much. But those early developments that they've made in geolocation capability, those early developments are actually helping us today to come up with more intelligent ways of helping the user of that service. So when we actually think about the Internet of Things, it sometimes is a little bit scary, because it's about saying, how do I make sure that I have understanding and have contextual information and data of everything and anything that's around me, that's in my environment, that I could actually glean some data set out of and react based on it. So that could, it should scare you if you think about how many of those devices will be connected at some point in your home. Samsung, which is a very, very large, besides they're making those crappy phones, they also make white goods. And those white goods that they make are washing machines and tumble dryers and dishwashers and microwave ovens. They happen to be a shareholder in Sigfox, and they're now looking at how do they deploy every single item that comes out of the factory floor with bundled connectivity that provides information for themselves, not for you as the customer. They want to know what is the duty cycle of this item. They want to know where this item is with some geolocation capability. They want to know what level of wear and tear is the belt of the specific machine is. And using that information, they'll be able to get a far more contextually rich data set that can help them better do their own production lines and produce better products, or at least increase their margin levels if it's not a better product. They'll know what they need to do. So I think let me leave you with those small pieces of information. Go have a look at our website if you want to get a bit more data around what's happening on the Internet of Things. Go have a look at our LinkedIn page. We publish lots of information on a regular basis. That's a far more in-depth on each and every vertical that Internet of Things is really going to be bringing transformation to over the next couple of years. Thank you very much.